that, okay? I'm going to start tonight by talking about the technology of audio. I think everybody knows it to some degree. We all are surrounded by audio, and we've done, you know, imagery, but this is the first time we've looked at time-based media. Okay, that's the big thing that distinguishes audio and video creation from image creation, manipulation, from data representation, those kinds of things. There's time-based media or movement. And that's why I wanted to show you that wind infographic, because it actually does tell you in real time the strength and direction of winds across the United States, right? Now, there's probably a little tiny bit of a lag, but it's still very, very cool. So I'll show you that after our quick break. What I want to talk about tonight is, you know, where does our audio digital media terms come from, right? And how do we manipulate them, right? So the tool process I'm going to take you through tonight is with Audacity, but we're going to begin by thinking about how audio gets created, right? And going back to the earliest audio. So it's funny because it's the same people, right? It's the same people who created media for pictures, right? Also made sound recordings. So look at this. Thomas Edison made his first sound recordings on sheets of tinfoil at Menlo Park in 1877. Okay, now how do you make recordings on tinfoil? Well, this is analog recording, and very similarly to the photographic recording, you need a medium, right? Because we're talking about media here, and you need some way of getting sound waves onto that medium. And so Edison experimented with tons of different materials that could essentially record the differentiation in air pressure when somebody speaks or makes a noise, to actually be able to both record the waveforms and then reproduce them back, right? You know, as you can see here, he started with tinfoil as a way of actually recording things. Now, how do you do that? Well, you need a device that can be moved by air that can then record the patterns of those air movements, right? That would be something like a giant horn, right? Something like this, not this, but something like this. I'm sure you've all seen pictures of Victrolas, right? I want to see an old one though, guys. Yeah, there with a horn. Do you see like the horn system here? Now here we're using the horn to actually play the recording back, and that is the speaker. It's the amplifier, right? But you would also use something just like this to actually record. Okay, so you would yell into that horn, and there would be a device that would record the vibrations that the horn records with a little filament, and it would scratch things in the tinfoil. Later, Edison used wax to make the recordings. So here's some recordings. I hope you can hear them. Let's find out. So here's some brass band marches. And it looks like it's on a cylinder. There we go. Okay, so the interesting thing about that is that, of course, what we're hearing is a cylinder recording, right? We're hearing it, that's been digitized, but it was done in 1900. Okay, here's something, Sousa's band by John Philip Sousa. Okay, this is an amberol cylinder, a different kind of wax cylinder probably. And that's 1909. So let's listen to the Stars and Stripes Forever. What the heck? Now, why is a band a good thing to record? Well, it moves a lot of air, right? You've got a lot of people making a lot of noise, and that's what sound is, right? It's just the movement of things through the air, or indeed through any other medium. right? I'm sure you've heard the old cliche, you know, in space, no one can hear you scream. That's because there's nothing that can, you know, be really moved very densely that your ear or any other device could pick up on. Now, that's not quite true, actually. There are molecules and different types of movements in space that can be picked up. Radio and other heat actually has a sound because that's just waves moving. So the irony of what we're doing here is we're listening to these things that were recorded on gold molded cylinders, you know, in 1912, for instance, for the Santa Lucia March. We're listening to this, but it's been digitized, right? This is digital media we're listening to. Sorry, I'm trying to get it a little quieter, but it doesn't seem to work. There we go. Yeah, this is digital media, right? So it's been digitized so we can hear it, which is pretty cool. In any case, that's what began the ability to record audio and indeed to play it back. And you know, I can't impress upon you enough how much our lives are different than people who lived a couple hundred years ago because of this, just because of this. As I was actually listening to the radio the other day, and a composer was saying, one of the things I can't wrap my head around is what someone's life would have been like before recorded music. Like, what would their experience of music have been, right? Let alone all the streaming you guys do and the fact that you basically have access to almost all of the world's music from your pocket, right? Imagine what it was like in 1850, before recorded music. What would you have heard in your entire lifetime? It's a very, very interesting question. Anyway, like other media, audio took off. It was used, as you can see, at first to fill up other media, you know, to record things around you. There's all kinds of early recordings. If you look at some of the earliest devices for recording sound, you'll see what they look like too. And that horn is basically, that horn with a little substrate in it is basically an early microphone. And a microphone, just so you know, is basically the same as a speaker, only the microphone has a much more sensitive diaphragm or thing that responds to air pressure. And a speaker, when you play something back on a speaker, it actually moves the air back the same way the recording has been made, okay? Is everybody with me on this? Yeah. I think you guys probably know this. Here's some really, really early microphones. You know, there's one of the really earliest ones, as you can see, right? This is from Edison, right? You can see these are some of the cylindrical players of audio. Do you see that? So the cylinder goes there, the horn goes there, and that actually amplifies the sound, right? And then microphones come along and make this a lot easier. But of course, along with the invention of the microphone and the speaker, because they're basically the same thing, they're just a diaphragm that's connected to a coil that's inserted inside a magnet. And when there's a magnetic change, the diaphragm moves back and forth in a speaker, right? So you send a signal out to the speaker and it creates fluctuations in the magnetic field and it moves the speaker, which moves the air, which lets you hear something. A microphone, same thing. I speak into a microphone, which I'm doing right now. It's a little tiny microphone on my headset. It's still a microphone. It moves the air. The diaphragm moves inside a magnetic coil, and that creates an electrical charge, which is then recorded, right? So that it can be played back or transmitted to you or made into hearing aids or the telephone or any of the things we sort of take for granted with sound, right? There's a really early one there too. That's awesome. It really shows some of the parts I was talking about. These are the coils on top, the diaphragm here, and it looks like a speaker, but it's probably a microphone as well. These days, microphones, of course, are just like camera lenses. And I wanted to make that as the first thing to think about when you're actually creating a podcast or if you're actually doing some recording. One of the things you have to look at is, what kind of microphone you have, right? And Do you have a microphone that's made for voice? Do you have a microphone that's made for you know, putting, you know, recording pianos or drums? Because, you know, if you put a microphone in front of a bass drum in a rock band, that's moving a lot more air, and that diaphragm has to be very, very specific for recording that kind of sound. We don't think about it because we have microphones all over the place. They're in your computer. They're around my head right now. But back in a different lifetime for me, I used to actually sell and work with AKG Acoustics, and they were a microphone manufacturer, still are, and they actually, you know, I worked with recording studios, right? And you need different microphones to do different things. And of course, starting probably in the 1920s and going forward until very recently, radio is the way people would most often interact with live sound and storytelling. Although, as soon as records came in and they were first, you know, they were first hard to use and very fast spinning. As soon as they came in, they also became another way of sharing and listening to music. And then you got into different types of systems, high fidelity systems, all those kinds of things. But what has been true since the beginning of audio as a medium is that the microphone you use determines the sound you're going to get. Okay? So if you're actually serious about, say, creating podcasts or doing digital storytelling or you know, creating a movie, one of the things you have to think about is, what are you doing with sound? What are you doing to record sound? What are you doing to create sound, right? You know, it's pretty interesting. If you just Google movie clips where they show the microphone, you'll actually see how they set up sound recording for movies, right? Just so you can see it. You'll see, do you see how they actually do this, right? This is a very, very good, it's a YouTube tutorial. You guys can have a look at that. But you can see there's cameras, and we'll talk all about this. There's cameras, but there is a microphone, somebody usually holding a microphone or having a microphone on a stand, right? And a camera. And that's exactly how most location sound is done, right? So you don't see the microphone, right? But it's there. There's a really old one with a horn. Look, isn't that great? That's perfect. You can actually see early recordings with that horn I was talking about as the earliest microphone. Right now, of course, there's also lots of post-production sounds in movies. They're not always what you think they are. They're not always done on location or as people are doing things. There's all kinds of Foley effects, they're called, which are actually fake sound effects to make something sound normal afterwards. You know, and movies use those as well. And they have all kinds of people who do sound effects just so you can hear what's going on. These are Foley artists. These are people who actually make sound effects, right? So if you need a sound effect of, you know, thunder, or looks like this one looks like somebody's, you know, gets hit with a brick or something, or they're doing something with concrete. You see all the microphones they've got here, right? They're actually making a sound effect to add to a podcast or a movie or whatever. And you'd be surprised at how sound effects get created. So, I mean, I'm sure you've all heard the sound of two lightsabers clashing in any of the Star Wars movies. That original effect was made by taking two wires and actually whipping a wire through the air into another wire, right? And that's what gives it its signature whistle through the air, right? They tried a lot of things to make that, right? But it's not the sound of two lightsabers, because there's no such thing as a lightsaber, as we all know. So yeah. Foley sound is really, really interesting. And it's added afterwards in addition to live sound. But it does come down to your ability to use microphones to create imaginative stories, right? And that's really what this is about, right? The appeal of radio, the appeal of podcasts, the appeal of sound is, it's different than film. It's different than images, because I can make the sound of 1,000 ants overtaking a hill in downtown Toronto while jets fly overhead. I can do that. And your imagination will fill in the rest, right? It's a lot like storytelling. You can do things in radio, you can do things with sound that you simply can't do, at least so far, with other media, right? So it's very, very interesting. I've actually put a link to In Praise of Radio by Under the Influence. It's a podcast that has nothing to do with the assignment. It's all about In Praise of Radio, and it's a good podcast by CBC. It's done by an advertiser, and of course, he is actually thinking about what radio can do and how things are told in stories over the radio. And when we think of podcasts, what really is a podcast except digital radio, right? And as I said before, all digital radio, all digital media shares lots of attributes, right? So streaming audio is the same as pretty much radio, except that you can pause it, you can select it, you can fast forward it, you can time shift it. Again, digital media messes with time, in addition to being networkable, copyable, and all those kinds of other things that we talked about previously. So it's important for you to understand that with sound, you have all the same kinds of choices that you would have with images. You have the same kinds of choices you have with photography, where you would select for sound, for photography, where you would select a lens. For sound, you want to select a microphone, and you want to make sure that microphone is placed properly. Now, for your project, I don't expect you to have access to a lot of microphones, okay? You do have one in your phone. It's probably noise canceling. That's pretty cool. It's probably better than the one in your computer, because your phone is meant for audio more than your computer is. On the other hand, you can plug better microphones into your computer through USB or through other interfaces on your computer. Even the headset you use might have a better or worse microphone, right? But I don't expect you to have like boom microphones or a selection of microphones. It is important for you to understand, though, if you're ever on a project, the fundamental principles of how a microphone is like a lens. So let's look at that just quickly. The main thing to understand about microphones structurally or from a choice selection is that they are a lot like lenses. You use certain lenses for close-up, as I showed you last time. Use certain lenses for portraits. Use certain lenses if you want to shoot into the sun. Use other lenses if you want to make something look like it's following closely. Microphones are very much the same, and they have developed over the last, well, now we know 100 and some odd years, 150 years almost, to really detect different sounds, be better at recording different sounds. And in what I'm showing here is that they have different patterns of sound recording, okay? So the sound in your phone or in a lot of cheap microphones you might pick up is often omnidirectional, right? It tries to record everything around it, okay? Another type of microphone is unidirectional microphone, right? And that's a microphone that simply records what's in front of it. And you can see that's what these patterns are, right? The dark line actually shows you the angles of what the microphone picks up. You might be thinking, why would you have a bidirectional microphone where it records what's in front of it and behind it, but not side to side? And I want you to think about sitting down with someone and talking to them across a table. This is a perfect setup, right? Perfect. You have your speaker speaking in the front and the interviewer speaking in the back, and nobody's putting a microphone back and forth. There's other polarity patterns, that's what they're called. And you can see some of them are, there's a shotgun microphone. That's the kind of thing you have on a camera out in the field where you only want front and back and maybe a little bit of the side. You can cross these patterns into stereo arrays to get different senses of sound, believe it or not. You can do multi-channel sound where you have sound in front of you, beside you, behind you. At AKG, when I worked there, they actually stuck microphones into false heads. Okay, false like a what's the word I want? Like a dummy head. And turns out if you put a cardioid microphone where your eardrum is, you can make some really wild recordings because the phase of your face is how you determine what's in front of you and what's behind you. Sound rolls over your ears, around your nose, over your head, and it sounds different. So that's actually how you know when somebody's coming up behind you or whether they're speaking in front of you. It's because of the phase of the sound. So AKG actually created a bunch of dummy heads. And the word in German is, the dummy heads are, I'll get that after the break too, but I'll show it to you. Now see, look, here's how the polar patterns work in real life, right? There's the filmmaker, there's the cameraman, he wants the sound to come from the subject that he's filming. Doesn't want sound to come from the people behind him. So it's important to understand this if you're ever in the field or if you rent some things, if we ever get back to school and you guys can actually rent some things, that's the kind of thing that you have to think about, right? And of course, like everything else, there's just so many resources on the web to help you understand this that it's not even funny. But the main thing is a good microphone is directional. Usually there's a directional pattern in a good microphone. Poor microphones, there are some very, very expensive omnidirectional microphones, but forget that for now. Most of them are cardioid, most of them are directional, so just like you point a camera, you know what you're getting, you point a microphone, you know what you're getting. It's truly important. This picture here, this is a Shure, I think this is probably an SM58. This is a classic microphone that people use to sing in rock bands and other things. It's a vocal microphone. It's meant for voice, but you can see that's the pattern, right? So you'll often see, rock bands, if you ever watch them, this lead singer might actually have one of those microphones and he might actually be like almost swallowing it because this microphone is meant for that kind of up close work. The one I have here for the semi-professional work I do is a Shure SM57. And it's funny because I recorded something for you earlier with it and I called it a Shure SM58, but it's not. This is an SM58 that I'm showing here. And the one I have is an SM57. But you'll see what I mean by what it does, okay? I did want to show you though, digitization of this equipment has become ridiculously available to people. Now that microphone I just showed you, a Shure SM58, it's about $300 or $400 bucks. The 57 I have here is about maybe $250. So that's really expensive, but it's good and it'll last a lifetime. So if you're doing podcasts, you're doing those kinds of things, it's worth investing in a couple of good mics. You don't necessarily have to spend that much though. Look at this.
I suppose Lemmy from Motorhead.
Have you ever seen this? You ever seen a Zoom H4n or H2? Right? This, look at this, 75 bucks used. And this is amazing. This is amazing. $74 used. This Zoom H2 handy recorder has 4 microphones, 2 in the front, 2 in the back, right? This is used clearly. It takes an SD card and it's a full digital cardioid microphone with 4 mics, and you can record 4 channels of better than CD quality audio with this thing on 2 AA's. Now, normally, we were in class, I would actually bring this in to show it to you, right? but to me, it just shows you. And of course they have, if you want a brand new one, there's one for 300 bucks Canadian, and you can actually see the microphones on it, right? Which is pretty cool. So if you ever need to do something, this is a really cool thing to have in your pocket, right? 4 mics, 2 front, 2 back, quadraphonic recording directly to an SD card, just like a camera, and it will give you super high definition. So one of the problems is, of course, I can sneak one of those into a concert pretty easily, and I can make a fully professional live recording with that thing for 300 bucks. It's pretty cool. But it's important that you get something that's high quality. If you are going to do, podcasts with someone else, this is all you need. You don't even need a computer. You need that. You can then take the card and put it in a computer and do your recording, your editing later, which I'm going to show you. But this is all you need, quality-wise, voice-wise. It's good for voice. It's good for music. It's a little bit directional, but it's pretty good. Harry, you have a question?
Yeah. So these particular items are extremely.
I can't hear you, man.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Can you hear me now? Okay.
Try again. It's my fault. Try one more time.
Can you hear me now?
I can now. Yep.
Okay. I have used this a little in the past, and I find it extremely difficult to use.
Oh yeah. How come?
I find it to be complicated. You have to have a sort of like a clear understanding of how to really manipulate this application, and as well how to position them.
That's interesting. I've used them quite a bit, and I find them really easy.
Really?
Yep. Yeah. Take the defaults, put it in the right place. I mean, okay. So now, admittedly, I'm coming from a place where I understand how microphones work, right? And I've had some studio background, so for me, these are dirt cheap and really good. Have you been trying to do music with them?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Music's tough because these are good enough that if the acoustics of the room are bad, it's going to sound like crap.
Wow.
Right. But if the acoustics are good, this will give you that as well. So you're right. They're less forgiving in some ways because they're better. They're actually better than a lot of other solutions. Those Shure microphones I showed you before, they're actually not so good for music. They're very good for voice, but they're not great for music. And I'll show you a couple ways to punch up regular recordings like this. That's really interesting, though. I find these really, really, really easy to use for cheap too, right? Yeah, so it's interesting. For 75 bucks, that thing over there is really, really good. I haven't seen any of the really newer ones. I think the newest ones, honestly, Harry, have got better displays. Like the thing that's really hard about using this H2 is that the display is crap, right? Mm-hmm. So you really have to have a good sense of what's going on. These are a lot better in terms of displays. I don't know that you've used this version or not.
It looks similar to this one. That's why I recognize it.
Interesting.
I remember I mean I didn't have to use it, but sometimes I needed to assist.
Yeah.
And it was a pain. I didn't know what I was doing with it.
Yeah. Well, okay. So I'll tell you, the other thing is, yes, Harry's right. Compared to a microphone with a regular jack, right? These things are complex because they're software. They're the computer too, right? The computer's built into this thing. So you can record in 4 channels, 2 channels, mono. You can record to MP3s or uncompressed audio. You can do anything you need to do with that thing without a computer. And that's the really cool thing, right? But yeah, compared to just having a couple of microphones and a computer, this could be more difficult. So the lesson here is, if you need to use one of these things, learn how to use it before you get to the gig, right? But they are, I mean, I've used them lots of times. They even have line ins and you can do all kinds of different stuff. So it's very cool. Okay, any other questions about any of this? Does this make sense to you guys so far? Or have I lost you?
So far, so good.
So far, so good.
Yes.
Okay, so let me just leave you with one more thing. I would, or maybe, you know what, let's take a break right now. We'll take a break right now. When we come back, we'll put together a little podcast in Audition, and Adobe Audition. Okay?
Oh, that would be great.
Yeah, let's do that.
Sounds good.
Okay. We'll come back at 6:59. Let's come back at about 7:10.
Perfect.
Okay.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. Talk to you soon.
Professor, I just want to say,
Yeah.
the microphones, I heard the first ones were invented during the America's centennial year, 1876. Like,
Could be. I would have to check that for sure.
I've heard something. So yeah, I'm just writing a story about that, so that's why I
Cool. Oh, very cool. Who invented them?
Exactly. Yeah, Alexander Graham Bell.
Oh,
Alexander.
Graham Bell. Okay. Yeah. That makes sense. That makes sense. You know, there was somebody else who also invented the phone at the same time, right?
Yeah, 1876. Yeah.
Yeah. Cool.
Okay.
Oh, sorry, Jamie. Just a quick question.
Yeah.
So I guess that's when you were mentioning air patterns and
Yep.
material that can basically produce those kind of patterns. I guess that's how records work then? Same
Oh,
idea?
absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, because
So-
I would notice that you could hear the record playing before turning on the speaker. And I was like,
Correct.
I
And
could
what-
never figure that out. So that now
Oh.
it makes sense.
So what, you know what you're hearing? So for those of you who are not like hipsters or as old as me,
Okay.
here is a vinyl recording. Okay, this is the kind of classic LP, which stands for long playing. It plays at 33 1/3 RPMs. Don't ask me why. It doesn't have to. It could be 45 RPMs or 78 RPMs, but it's 33 1/3 RPMs because the slower it plays, the longer it goes, right? The more you get out of this fixed format. What you're looking at are grooves, literal grooves in the vinyl, okay? And the vinyl has been pressed from a metal master, right? And it's actually, there's a great YouTube video I'll put up there so you can see how they make records. But those are literally the same kind of representation of sound that Edison made in wax. They are literally the analog representation of fluctuations in air. Okay? So when you have your record player and you put it on, the thing that creates music from this is not a microphone and it's not a speaker, it's a needle.
Yeah.
Okay? And the needle or the stylus goes inside the grooves, and it's a little tiny thing, right? And it vibrates back and forth in the groove, the way the groove is written. And believe it or not, there's a little, on the stylus, on the needle, there's a little metal thing, right? That then vibrates inside of magnets, or actually vibrates a coil. And that creates a micro, like a little tiny electronic signal that then goes, you know, through the tone arm into your amplifier, into the preamplifier, and then, you know, you hear music coming out. So what you hear before the amplifier is turned on is the needle vibrating. You actually hear the needle moving the air.
And so, just another quick question: Is it more subjective that why people say the quality is better than digital, or is there an actual physical element to it?
Well, I mean, so let's put it this way: the quality of good analog can be better than the quality of bad digital. Let's put it that way.
Okay. Yeah, gotcha.
Right. In my own opinion, and it's not a completely untechnical opinion, good digital is mind-blowingly good.
Yeah, I've thought that too.
Yeah, it's freaking unbelievable.
So good.
And it's only been around for the last 5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
And the real difference is bit depth. Okay, so it's not the frequency response, it's not distortion, it's not anything like that. It's how accurate the sampling rate is. This is a little bit technical for some people here, but basically digital media works by sampling things. Okay, so when we had a camera, the camera is actually sampling light levels and assigning pixels. When you have a digital audio system, the sound comes in analog from the microphone and then gets transformed by sampling that sound frequency. And if you have a low amount of samples with a low degree of depth, in other words, the actual frequency of the samples per second, then it sounds kind of crappy. And you've all heard that, right? Really bad compressed digital audio sounds bad. It sounds as bad analog audio, like that stuff we heard from, from Edison.
It's like a gritty phone call almost.
Yeah, exactly. But the really good stuff is really, really good. Now, what I'm showing you here is an Audio-Technica cartridge. You see that little dot where my cursor is?
Yeah.
That is the needle.
I got a funny story for you.
Okay.
First time I tried setting up a record player,
Yeah.
I didn't notice that little dot. I thought the sort of long part was the needle. So I then twisted it and broke it.
Oh man, no.
I was very upset.
So that is actually that is the stylus, but the needle itself is that little chip, that little line. And then inside there are two magnets that thing and a coil. And that's how it works. Right.
I sorry to interrupt, but I noticed that when I was playing, I used to play this particular LPs.
Yeah.
I didn't understand how the sound will come out. So in fact, I believe that those grooves were like like those instruments that had little tape with holes.
Oh yeah.
So I still don't understand how it worked. To be honest with you, like.
What do you want to know?
So for example, you were saying that it moves air.
That's right.
It's not the surface that has the screws. But
it is.
I kind of got lost on that one.
Okay, so let's go back for a second.
Everyone's going to break. I guess.
That's okay. No. We'll. This is fine. I want to show you how vinyl records are made. 4 minutes. This is good. We'll take a longer break after. Let's look at this for a sec. I want to show you how they do this, and then I'll explain. Okay? Okay, let's have some sound. Oh, okay. All right, so you see what they're doing here. Okay, that was just the introduction, I think. Okay. So how do they do it? Okay, this is, he's the owner.
So are we supposed to listen to what they're saying?
Can you hear it,
No.
Harry?
No.
You can't, eh?
No.
Okay, I'll fix this and show you later. Let's do this one more time. Let's see what I can see here magnified. Okay, so do you see the actual groove?
Yeah.
Okay, so that groove is a representation of the air moving made by instruments or whatever it is that's being recorded. Do you see?
Okay. Okay.
And so it's an analog representation of the actual sound. So it's recorded by a stylus and cut into metal. And then they actually take the metal mother and they create, you saw it, pressing vinyl from that mother. It actually makes the grooves. And it's interesting because it's positive and negative, just like a negative, but leave that for now. These are grooves that represent the actual sounds that are recorded, right? Because sounds have waves, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what happens is when the needle goes into that groove, it vibrates along with those little grooves, right? And the vibration either vibrates a magnet, that's why it said moving magnet cartridge, right? Or it vibrates a coil around a magnet. Either way, that creates an electric field and a fluctuation in that electric field. Now that electric field turns out, if you were to amplify it and then attach it to a speaker, which would then move air with that electric field, actually creates the noise.
Okay, gotcha.
The noise that's recorded. It's the same for tape, right? Analog tape records the waveforms as magnetic fluctuations, and then it plays them back, right, with a tape head as electronic fluctuations. Because sound and electricity and radio are all connected in terms of waves, right? It's just that the sounds that we hear, as opposed to the light that we see, is very, 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 very slow, long waves in a certain range. If they get too high, we call them radio. If they get higher than that, we call them light or heat. So this is literally a representation of an orchestra playing or whatever it is.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's amazing. It just looks like grooves. But that's why when Daniel puts the needle down and doesn't turn on the amplifier, he still hears the needle moving back and forth. And if you listen very carefully, that's the actual sound.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Just learned something. Thank you.
Yeah. Now the problem with it is, one of the problems is that, you know, there's a lot of pressure on that diamond on the vinyl. There's a lot of pressure. It's literally spinning off some of the vinyl when you're actually playing your record. So you lose a lot of quality after playing a few times, and then there's groove distortion, etc. Okay. Yeah. There you go.
Well, finally.
There, now you know.
Yeah.
Right?
Just history now.
Yeah, and it's not true that it's better than, I like I say, I don't think analog sound is necessarily better than digital sound. It's just that
Yeah, that might be a little bit of snobbery, maybe.
it's a lot of snobbery, and you know what? It's a lot of mystery. Like there's something quite magical about a record player. There really
The
is.
physical,
Yeah,
reading
it's
the notes and the lyrics is a
absolutely. There's something magical about it. The packaging is better. The actual, you know, putting the needle on the record and having an album, it's a different experience than streaming, you know, streaming digital. So there you go.
All right.
Okay, now we're going to take a break.
Okay.
Okay. And we'll be back at 7:20. How's that?